welcome or welcome back to my channel, Afropean Monika. Today we have a guest, but before I introduce him, let me just briefly tell you what we are going to discuss. We are going to talk about such issues as systemic racism, colorism, classism in the UK, West Africa and the Caribbean. We are not just going to talk about those issues, we are going to look for solutions, of course. So now, let me tell you, my guest is Kerry Waterman. He was born in the late 70s in Barbados, but then relocated to the UK in 2002. I am going to read a little bit because I don't want to miss anything that's important in this introduction. So, having been a captain in the British Army, an equality and diversity advisor, and a detective chief inspector, Kerry has gained so many insights into, for instance, solving systemic racism in the UK. Kerry and his team have also been hunting criminals across the UK, Europe and Africa, which led them to be featured in season 2 of the BBC documentary Fugitives.
It's the job of a specialist team of detectives to track down these unwelcome visitors.
It is important that we find these persons because quite often people think that they can escape justice by running overseas once they've committed a crime, and we need to send a message that wherever you are, we will find you and we will bring you to justice.
As you can probably tell by now, my guest means business. However, his passion for justice extends beyond bringing renegades to face trials, right? I am super excited to be able to talk to him about those everyday isms affecting our societies at large. And we will be relating this conversation to such countries as England, Barbados, Ghana, Nigeria, predominantly. So I really hope that you enjoy this conversation. It is an inspiring one, so please tune in and do join in the comments below.
Okay.
So you were born in Barbados but migrated to the UK about 2 decades ago. Could you share why you decided to relocate to England in 2002 and why you recently decided to return to Barbados?
Okay. Back in the early 90s, so 1993, 1994, I used to go to England nearly annually with my family, and I would stay with my uncle and aunt. They lived in Hounslow in Middlesex, and I just loved what England was. No, I love the weather, I love the people. I just found it to be so exciting. I mean, coming from a small country, being Barbados, the grass always seemed greener on the other side, I guess, but I just absolutely loved England. And I remembered when I was 16 years old and I just finished my holiday and I was due to come back to the Caribbean, I didn't want to come back. I was like, I want to stay here with my uncle and aunt. And I knew from then that my life would take me in the direction of England. Fast forward, I came back, I finished my secondary education. Funnily enough, I did my associate degree in hotel management. So my intent was actually to work in hospitality and tourism. I then went on to do my degree, and working in tourism was not optimal for that. It was so much work. I just could not balance my studies and that work. So I needed something that was a little less intense. So I got a job working for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the government lounge. So I worked in the VIP section. And my job was to process the diplomats and any persons of standing who came into Barbados and also assist with their departure. This one fateful shift, I was working at the airport and Duchess Sarah Ferguson had arrived with her daughters. And there was a gentleman from the British High Commission. So he said to me, you do quite well in the British Army. When he said it to me, it's like something clicked. And I went and I researched Sandhurst.
Yeah.
And I saw this organization where they trained you to be a leader. More importantly, it's a job where I could play sports. At the time, I was fighting for Barbados. I was actually the national kickboxing champion at the time. And I wanted to do a job that, would keep me interested, because I back then I was young and I just had a lot of energy and I bored easily. I applied to Sandhurst. I quit my job. I got on a plane and I moved to England, and I lived with my uncle and aunt whilst I went through the whole process. So that was a lot, because for me, failure was not an option.
Where did you get that mindset, though?
So I did not come up wealthy. My family has come from very humble beginnings. My grandmother, she was a maid, and she worked really hard. She had 7 children. Yeah. And my grandfather, he died before I was born. I think he died in the 1960s, and he was a police officer in Barbados. So I don't know, maybe genetically I was always predisposed to becoming a police officer. And it was just something in me which knew, well, you know what, I wanted more. When I moved out from home, I guess it was a baptism of fire, because you realize that life is not that easy. And
are we talking about the UK now, or are we still talking about Barbados?
This is Barbados still. This is Barbados.
Okay.
I knew what it was to be hungry. I knew what it was to do without. And in all seriousness, when you experience hunger for the first time, you can either go down the road of, I'm going to do whatever it takes, legal or illegal, to make sure this doesn't happen again, or you'll say, I'm going to make sure that I work hard and do the right thing and set things up so that the children that come after me and my family will never have to go through what I have been through. And I chose that road on the right.
What do you think makes one choose one or the other?
I think it's down to circumstance. It's down to what you're exposed to. Because truthfully, there are so many friends of mine who were very, very poor, and they chose that road. And I know people who were very come from very wealthy families and who didn't have a bother. And you know what? They went down the road to the left because they felt, I need to live this lifestyle that my family has for me to achieve. Yeah. And they weren't prepared to put the work in.
Yeah.
And what we need to realize is that the world is not set up fairly. And when someone who's got money gets into trouble, it's different to when someone who's poor gets into trouble.
Oh my God, how true. Would you say that it's especially so in third world countries or not?
I'd say in smaller communities, where everyone knows everyone, it is a lot more complicated, because where persons at the top are affiliated with other persons or whatever, I'd say it's almost like a network, right? I'm not suggesting for 1 second that there's corruption at the highest level. What I'm saying is where people have money to afford the best lawyers, or they move in certain circles, I think more opportunities are open to you. Persons will be put in your corner to help you to get out of whatever little skirmish that you may encounter. There are checks and balances in these countries. Again, culturally, you've got persons from different backgrounds, where if you come from a certain tribe, you'll be treated in a certain way. You'll be afforded certain things. I guess in the Caribbean, whilst it may not be a tribe, there's still certain family surnames that have power.
Right. So we're talking more classism. So we are talking more classism, isn't it? We'll get to that.
Correct. So if I go one step further, I would say where persons in some instances suggest that there is racism, scrutinize it, you'll find that is that also classism.
Are we talking racism versus colorism versus classism, or are you saying that that's still classism more than anything else? When we
I think
look
I think that the terms are used interchangeably without truly understanding what these things really mean. So, for example, I'm gonna go into history for you now, right? Do you remember you had the slave trade where the slaves came over to the Caribbean from Africa?
yeah,
And then we had the slave masters, the plantation owners, who had children with some of the slaves. Often they became indentured servants. They worked in the house. Now, if I say
yeah,
to you that in the 1970s and in the 1980s in Barbados, when I was growing up, a lot of the lighter skinned women were working in the banks, a lot of the lighter skinned guys. It was harder for persons who were darker, or at least that was the perception that was out there, that in order for you to do certain jobs, especially customer facing jobs, they wanted those persons with the lighter skin, with the quote unquote pretty hair. And I'm gonna get biblical with this, trust me. You had fellas who felt, in order for me to show that I've arrived, I need to get one of these women who's light-skinned. There's a whole movement in the region. It was even heard in our music. There's a guy called Buju Banton. Buju had a song called Browning, right? So what happened is that persons of the darker skin hue, in some cases, but then there's been a resurgence, but they start to feel inferior because not treated as well. Were not getting the same opportunities. Teachers were treating the kids, and I'm seeing this at the primary level, small kids, they would treat the kids that were lighter skinned better than they would treat the kids that were darker skinned. And this is a fact. This is not fiction.
I have to tell you, like what you are talking about, it kind of helps me make sense of some of the attacks that I had received over this, what you are talking about right now. I heard all these comments, like it's easier for you because you're a light skin, or like, I don't even know, I'm not even light skin, but like, I guess maybe lighter than some, or your hair and all that stuff. And I'm always like, I could never understand where that was coming from. Like, I'm obviously mixed race, right? But having spent some time in the UK and having had these conversations, having read history a little bit and all that stuff, I can see why many of the people that had previously attacked me were so angry. But then the problem is they're angry at you for like no reason. Like, you don't have to do anything to that person as a mixed race person. This is causing so much chaos. And now there's like, especially when you look at America right now, there's this battle between the mixed race and the black people, right? And you're just looking at it like and thinking like, whoa, like where does this end? It's just crazy to me.
Right. Let me answer you, right? So, right, this is where it gets interesting. So this is where now the whole thing of racism versus prejudice versus classism now is going to make sense to you. So whilst back then we recognize, that initially, if someone was of a certain skin color, they'd get certain treatment. This was not necessarily the rule, because the poor persons who were light-skinned quite often were treated differently to the persons of the middle class or upper class level. So a person who was slightly darker, if they came from money, they would be treated well. So what that's saying to you then is, well, clearly it can't just be about color. And moving to England, listen, I remember the first time I saw a white person driving a bus or a white person picking up garbage. I stared because it was not something I was accustomed to seeing. But it just goes to show that, in bigger countries, they do every job. It's not something that I'm exposed to, because for me, when I grew up, I saw most persons who were white or who were lighter skinned, they tended to have a better standard of living for whatever reason. But that was just what I was exposed to, as opposed to it being the rule. So the other thing is, where if you were growing up in Barbados, if you had grown up in Barbados, persons might have said to you, "Oh, you're white."
Yeah, I hear that
when
in
you go to
Ghana, which is
England,
ridiculous.
they'll say you're black.
Poland, that's my case with, you know, I'm Polish Nigerian, right? In
Yes.
Ghana, that's what they call me, Obroni. You know, like I literally have kids yelling Obroni, Obroni. Is ridiculous. In Poland, black, Czarna. So
Yeah.
it's there, absolutely.
Yeah. So that's why I am so glad I moved to England. I'm so glad I had the experience, because it opened my eyes to so much. Yes.
Now that we are there, why did you then decide to return to Barbados? 2019, right? Was it 2019?
Yes, 2019. Yeah. So I've done a lot in England, and I love the UK. Make no mistake, I love England. I still see it as home. I love it to bits. But 2 reasons. One, I came back here in 2017, and I had done some consulting. And I recognized that I actually have got so much that I can give back to the region. You know, I gained a lot of knowledge in the short space of time that I was in the military and in the police. And it was something that came naturally. So I just knew that I had to give back to our community. It's not that the people in the region don't have the knowledge or the ability. It's that quite often they're not the resources in place, and they've not been exposed to certain things. So it was for me to aid in that, to bring that knowledge that I had from my international experience. Secondly, what I wanted was for my kids to grow up in a region where they have an opportunity to grow and have fun, you know, without having to be shut up in the house for 6 months in the year because it's so cold, and you know, and not seeing cousins, and just being able to have that freedom as children. But I would often remember what it was like to wake up and run down to the beach. I lived 30 seconds from the water. 30 seconds it took me to run across the road into the water. And I wanted my kids to experience this, to be able to build sandcastles in December.
Wow. So do you guys live by the water right now?
Well, I'd say I'm about a 10-minute drive away from the water, so not too far.
I wanted to talk to you about racial discrimination in the UK specifically, and also about your perspective on systemic racism. So not individual, but systemic racism. I often have conversations about individual racism because that's where I feel I can say something, but I never feel like I have much say when it comes to systemic racism. And I feel like you are a really great person to talk about that, because one, you specialize in diversity and inclusion or equality. You are a very successful Black man, and I mean, you've experienced the UK from the inside out, I guess, you know. So what is your perspective on that? Okay,
so when I joined the British Army, I remember when I was looking at the different aspects of the military in terms of what I wanted to join, there were areas that looked really exciting for me. And then I was quickly told, well, to be honest with you, you can't join this one because you need to come from a certain background, or you need to have a certain amount of money. Truthfully, I wouldn't have been able to afford to join these particular cap badges. So I won't name and shame. But in essence, I recognized there and then that there were certain doors potentially that could be shut to you because of your financial situation. Right. So we're not going to touch on color at this stage.
Right.
My experience at Sandhurst was good, but I still experienced some stuff in between which left a bitter taste. I remember there were times where persons would make remarks that were racist. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. There were persons who made racist comments. I remember I had to jack one guy up because he said something that was racist to one of my colleagues. And whilst I was a Black officer cadet, so I was joining the British Army, my colleague was sent by his country to do officer training. So he was going to go back to his country, and you found that persons who came from certain countries were treated, I'd say, less favorably. So then I commissioned, I lived in North Yorkshire. Now, I'll tell you something. You know England. And if I say to you that as a Black man coming from the Caribbean to move to North Yorkshire as your first military posting, that's a baptism of fire. I loved it. And yet I lived in York. Really lovely, lovely, lovely town. Lots of culture, character, whatever. But again, there were one or two, not most people were nice, but there were one or two persons who were there who said some things to me that were racist. So, for example, I remember there was an athletics event at my regiment, and I was throwing the javelin. And I was quite good because remember I said to you, I was a sportsman. I used to run, shot put, javelin, everything. So these things came naturally to me. So I won the javelin comfortably. And one officer, he was a major, he said to me, well, you know, the reason you're so good at that is because your ancestors were spear chuckers.
They were what?
I was like, spear chuckers.
You know, were there any incidents that you felt where you felt in danger, or truly, you know, something that truly broke your heart, where you were like, just, I can't do this potentially, or not?
Well, I'll tell you something.
Yeah.
And I'll give you two examples. I'll give you one from the army and I'll give you one from the police. Okay. The first one, I was a legal advisor to a soldier who had committed a crime. He had stolen something. Okay. So I was his legal advisor. So I went to court. So it was myself, so me. There was the driver, and there was the accused. Just the three of us. The court administrator came over to us, and she said, good morning, who's the driver? And the driver held his hand up. So that just leaves two people now. The
so
legal
she assumed
advisor
you were
the accused. The woman looked at me and said, so you must be the accused. Yeah. She said that. And in my best Oxfordian accent, I said, I beg your pardon. And she was like, oh, so sorry, because then she realized her faux pas. But this is where the whole unconscious bias thing comes in. She said it without even thinking. Right? But the one with the police, for me, is a lot more telling. And this knocks the whole racism thing out the window. So I was in charge of the international unit. So basically my team would, you know, go to different countries to get fugitives that were wanted and bring them back to the UK for justice, or we would take persons who were wanted and extradite them to countries where they committed crimes. So in this particular instance, it was me and two other officers. So two white officers and me. I was in charge of the contingent, and the suspect, or the accused, the person was white. I was on an airline. You know what? I'm wary about saying airline names. I'll just say an airline from the UK to Barbados. Well, actually to Antigua, right? To Antigua.
Okay.
And so I went over to the black air hostess. The black air hostess. She was from Manchester. Never forget it.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, I'd like to buy this, please.
Mm-hmm.
She said, okay, if you go back to your seat, you had the prisoner in the middle wearing a hoodie, and my two colleagues, they were wearing polos. No, I was wearing a blazer. And remember, the lady sent me to my seat, and she said she'd, get the stuff. But I went to the bathroom, and when I came back, I saw that the prisoner, he was laughing. And the officers there were like, oh my God. So I said, is everything okay? Do you know that the black hostess asked the prisoner if it was okay that I could buy something, because she thought I was the prisoner, he was one of the police officers.
A black air hostess.
The black air hostess thought because I was black, I must be the prisoner.
That's bad.
So guess what? It's not about the racism now. It's unconscious bias. So you recognize this thing is in our own people. And in some cases, they're worse. In all my years, I have never had a white air host or host make me feel uncomfortable. I felt uncomfortable on that flight. I went over to her and I said, did you think I was a prisoner because I was black? And she laughed nervously, and she said, at least I was nice to you. And there was something inside of me